Last June, I stood in front of a flower bed I had completely given up on 47 dead plants over 3 seasons, a hose I had stopped picking up, and a credit card statement from the garden center I was actively avoiding. 8 months later, that same flower bed is the first thing I show every visitor who walks into my backyard. 10 shrubs made that turnaround happen, and every single one of them went into the ground in June. If you've ever stood over a dead garden bed wondering whether you're the problem, stay with me, because the evidence I'm about to walk you through proves you're not. Before I walk you through the survivors, let me set the conditions of the investigation, because a verdict without context is just an opinion, and you've already heard enough gardening opinions to last a lifetime. The investigation ran across 3 full growing seasons in a Zone 6B backyard with 2 problem corners that every single viewer of this channel will recognize on sight. One corner bakes from 11 in the morning until 7 at night, sitting on compacted clay that the previous owner apparently mixed with concrete and then forgot about for 15 years. The other corner is dry shade under a mature silver maple, a tree that drinks every single drop of water within 20 feet of its trunk and laughs at anything you try to plant beneath it. I tested 47 shrubs across those 2 zones, plus a middle ground bed that gets honest part, sun for about 5 hours a day. I watered for the first 3 weeks after planting, and then I cut them off completely. No fertilizer, no deer fencing, no babying, no pep talks. I wanted to know which June planted shrubs would actually fill in fast, stay full, and keep producing without me standing over them every weekend with a hose in one hand and a clipboard in the other. The 10 survivors made this list. Stick around all the way to the end, because plant number 3 contradicted everything I thought I knew about a shrub I had personally written off. And the one I'm calling the verdict changer doesn't show up until much later in this video. It's the single shrub that rewrote the entire direction of the investigation, and I'll tell you exactly when we get there. Plant number 1, Spirea, specifically the cultivar Goldmound, and its tougher, longer blooming cousin, Magic Carpet. Field notes from year 1. I planted it on June 12th as a chartreuse little mound about 12 inches across, and honestly, I gave it about a 40% chance of making it through July. By August, it had doubled in size. By September, it was 18 inches tall and 24 inches wide, with little flat pink flower clusters sitting on top of the foliage like frosting on a cake. Year 2 observation. It tripled again, and the spring growth came in this gorgeous coppery red before settling into that glowing yellow-green that gives the plant's name. Year 3 ruling. 0 losses, 0 pruning emergencies, 1 optional shearing in late winter just to keep the shape tight and rounded. Spirea is hardy from zones 3 through 8, which means almost every single one of you watching this video, from northern Maine to the southern edge of Georgia, can plant this shrub with confidence. One warning straight from the field notes. Do not plant Spirea japonica in the southeast, where it's flagged as invasive. Choose the native-friendly double-played doozy instead, which is completely sterile and won't seed itself around your yard or your neighbors. Verdict: pass. Plant number 2, Weigela, and the cultivar that stayed standing through every test I threw at it was Wine and Roses, with Sonic Bloom Pink close behind. Year 1, planted at about 18 inches tall, looked sulky and offended for 6 straight weeks, and then it exploded into trumpet-shaped pink flowers in late June that lasted 3 solid weeks. Year 2, 4 feet tall, 4 feet wide, blooming on and off from May into October, because the Sonic Bloom series reblooms continuously without any deadheading on your part. Year 3 observation, hummingbirds, constantly. I genuinely had to apologize to my husband for the amount of time I started spending standing at the kitchen window. Zones 4 through 8. The dark burgundy foliage on Wine and Roses is what really sells this shrub. It gives you that high contrast designer look without any of the effort, which is the whole reason any of us are here in the first place. One field note worth flagging clearly. This shrub wants at least 6 hours of direct sun. In my dry shade test corner, it sulped permanently and never bloomed once. Verdict: pass, but only with sun. Plant number 3. This is where my assumptions broke wide open. Forsythia. I had personally written this shrub off as a 1-week wonder, yellow for a brief moment in March, then a boring green blob for the remaining 11 months of the year. The cultivar show-off sugar baby completely changed my mind. Year 1 observation. 30 inches tall, perfectly rounded shape, covered head to toe in yellow blossoms before anything else in the entire yard had even woken up. Year 2, it stayed compact. That was the genuine shocker. Old-fashioned Forsythia sprawls into a 10-foot tangled mess that swallows fences and small children. This new cultivar held its shape like it had been toe-buried. Year 3 ruling, still under 3 feet, still blooming heavily every March, still asking for absolutely nothing in return. Zones 5 through 8. Maintenance note, prune immediately after flowering or you'll cut off next year's blooms. Forsythia sets its flower buds in summer for the following spring. Honor that one rule, and this shrub is forever. Verdict, pass, along with a personal apology to Forsythia for years of unfair dismissal. Plant number 4. Ninebark, cultivar summer wine, and the more compact, tiny wine for smaller spaces. Year 1, I planted it directly into clay so dense I had to chop the root ball loose with the edge of a shovel and then chop the planting hole with the same shovel. It did not care. Burgundy leaves emerged within 10 days. Arching branches followed in July, and white flower clusters appeared in late June that the bees treated like a 4-star buffet. Year 2, 5 feet tall, beautifully vase-shaped, and the bark started peeling in papery layers, which is exactly where the name comes from, supposedly 9 separate layers of bark on a mature stem. Year 3, drought, deer, a late freeze in May, and a neighbor kid with a soccer ball that hit it at full speed. Still standing. Still beautiful. Zones 3 through 7, which makes Ninebark one of the cold hardiest options on this entire list. Warning from the field notes, the standard species Ninebark gets enormous, 10 feet by 10 feet or more. Stick with the dwarf-named cultivars unless you actually have the open room for a small tree. Verdict, pass. Plant number 5, Potentilla, the cultivar Happy Face Yellow, and the white-flowered Abbotswood. Year 1, this was a scrubby, unimpressive little thing that I almost pulled out and replaced in July because it looked so insignificant next to everything else. By the second week of August, it was completely covered in butter yellow flowers the size of nickels, and it didn't stop blooming until the first hard frost in late October. Year 2, 3 feet by 3 feet, blooming continuously from early June through frost without a single break. Year 3, I genuinely forgot it existed. And that is the highest compliment I can give a shrub on this entire list. Zones 2 through 7. And yes, you heard that correctly, Zone 2. Which means if you garden in Manitoba, northern Minnesota, the Scottish Highlands, or anywhere else where winter goes 30 below, this is your shrub. Tip: shear it back by about 1/3 every spring and it stays dense and full. Skip that one step and it gets leggy and open in the middle, but it still blooms its heart out. Verdict: pass. 5 shrubs in, the pattern is clear. The best June survivors aren't rare or expensive. They're compact, non-stop bloomers built to thrive with almost no care. Coming up next, 2 shrubs that conquered dry shade where nothing else survived. 1 deer ignored for 3 straight years. The verdict-changing fast spreader that completely changed how I think about low-maintenance backyards. And a final shrub that bursts electric blue when everything else turns brown. And that verdict changer? It's nowhere near where you'd expect on this list. Plant number 6, Hydrangea paniculata. And I want to be very specific about that because mophead hydrangeas are a completely separate investigation with completely different results. The cultivars that survived every test were Limelight, the more compact Little Lime, and the dwarf Bobo. Year 1, planted in June into part sun, watered for 3 weeks, then cut off completely. White cone-shaped flower heads the size of an American football appeared in mid-July. Year 2. Those cones aged gracefully from white to pink to a deep antique rose by October and stayed on the plant all winter looking like dried roses against the snow. Year 3 ruling, bulletproof. Zones 3 through 8. Unlike the blue and pink mophead hydrangeas that depend on soil pH and old wood and a checklist of conditions longer than your grocery receipt, Panicle hydrangeas bloom on new wood, which means you prune them once in early spring and they reward you no matter what the winter did to them. One warning worth noting, Limelight grows to 8 feet tall and wide. Bobo tops out at 3 feet. Match the cultivar to your actual space, not to the picture on the tag. Verdict: pass. Plant number 7, Diervilla, also called bush honeysuckle, and please do not confuse this with the invasive vining honeysuckle, which is a completely different plant with a completely different and much worse reputation. Cultivar Kodiak orange. This was my dry shade test plant. And dry shade is genuinely where shrubs go to die, a quiet, slow death. Year 1, I planted it directly under the silver maple. I honestly assumed it was a sacrifice to the gardening gods. Year 2, it had spread by underground runners into a tidy 3-foot colony with orange-tinged foliage and small yellow flowers that the bumblebees found within an hour of the first bloom opening. Year 3, still going strong, still suckering politely along the edges, still looking like I had planned the entire thing on purpose. Zones 3 through 7. This is a North American native shrub, which means the pollinators recognize it on sight and the deer mostly leave it alone. Maintenance note, it does spread, but slowly enough that you can completely control it with one cut around the edges per year. Verdict, pass, with enthusiasm, especially for that corner of the yard you've already given up on. Plant number 8. Boxwood. And yes, I know, I can hear you already. You've heard about boxwood blight and you're skeptical. The field notes confirm the disease is real and it is spreading, but the newer cultivars Green Velvet and New Gen Independence were specifically bred to resist it. Year 1, I planted them as 18-inch globes, and they looked exactly the same in October as they did in June, which sounds boring until you realize that is precisely the point of an evergreen shrub. Year 2, they filled out into deep green spheres that held their shape through a brutal polar vortex with sustained wind chills below zero. Year 3, deer browsed every hosta, every daylily, and every tulip in the yard, and walked past the boxwoods like they were invisible. Zones 5 through 9. Tip, shear lightly in early summer after the new growth hardens off, and never ever in fall pruning invites winter damage and dieback. Verdict, pass, but only with the disease-resistant newer cultivars. The old-fashioned Saffruticosa English boxwood is a different story, and not a happy one. Plant number 9. This is the verdict changer I have been promising you since the opening line of this video. Viburnum, specifically the cultivar Brandywine and its essential pollinator partner Winterter, or alternatively the absolute workhorse Blue Muffin Arrowwood Viburnum. I planted 3 viburnums in June of the first year, and I genuinely expected nothing remarkable from them. By the end of year 1, they were already 4 feet tall with flat, lacy white flower clusters that smelled faintly of vanilla on warm evenings. Year 2 is when the entire investigation pivoted on its axis. The spring flowers had turned into berries by late summer, and not just any berries. Brandywine produces fruit that ripens in distinct stages, so the same single shrub holds pink berries, blueberries, and deep purple berries all on the same branch at the same time, like someone had hung tiny jewelry on every stem. The songbirds found them in October. The shrub kept its glossy green leaves all the way into November, when they suddenly flipped to a deep burgundy red and held that color for almost 3 weeks before dropping. Year 3 ruling, this was the shrub that genuinely changed how I think about the entire category of low-maintenance backyard plants, because Viburnum doesn't just survive a tough season, it actively performs in every single season of the year. Spring flowers, summer foliage, fall berries, fall color, winter structure with those bare architectural branches. Zones 3 through 8, depending on the specific species you choose, with Blue Muffin going down comfortably to Zone 3 and Brandywine comfortably through Zone 7. The single warning in my field notes, and this one is absolutely critical, so listen closely. Most viburnums need a second compatible cultivar planted somewhere nearby for berry production. Plant Brandywine all by itself and you will get the flowers, but no berries at all. Plant it within about 50 feet of Winterter, and you get the full jewelry show every fall. This is the shrub I would tell my past self to plant first before any of the others on this list. If you only take one single recommendation from this entire 3-year investigation, please take this one. Plant number 10. Caryopteris, also called the blue mist shrub, cultivar Dark Night, or the deeper toned Beyond Midnight. Year 1, a small, unimpressive gray-leaved thing that looked like lavender's stockier, less glamorous cousin. Year 2, it tripled in size, and in late August, it suddenly exploded into electric, almost neon blue flower clusters at the exact time of year when almost nothing else in any garden anywhere is still blooming. Year 3, the honeybees and the native bumblebees found it from what felt like 3 counties away. The buzzing was genuinely audible from the back porch. Zones 5 through 9. Tip, cut it back hard in early spring, almost all the way down to about 6 inches from the ground, and it rewards you with denser growth and significantly more flowers. This is the closing exhibit on this list because it answers a very specific question that every tired gardener eventually asks. What do you plant for late summer and early fall color when everything else has given up and gone brown and crispy? Verdict, pass. So here's the documentary's thesis, the sentence that the evidence finally supported after 3 full seasons and 47 dead plants. A lush backyard isn't built by perfect gardeners. It's built by people who plant the right 10 shrubs in June and then have the discipline to let those shrubs do their job without interference. Spirea for the Chartreuse Foundation, Weigela for the hummingbirds, Forsythia for the spring apology, Ninebark for the abuse tolerance test, Potentilla for the forgotten cold climate corner, Panicle Hydrangea for the summer show, Diervilla for the dry shade you'd written off completely, Boxwood for the structure that deer simply ignore, Viburnum for everything else and every other season, Caryopteris for the late summer encore when nothing else is willing to perform. That is the verdict. That is the whole investigation in 10 lines. You don't have to be a perfect gardener to have a great garden. You just have to plant the right things and then have the discipline to trust them to do what they were bred to do. I spent 3 full seasons and 47 dead plants to confirm that one sentence for you, and I would genuinely like you to skip the dead plant phase entirely and start where I finished. Plant any 3 of these shrubs in June, and by the time the leaves turn in October, you will be standing in your own backyard wondering why you ever thought this whole thing had to be so hard, so expensive, and so exhausting. If this field report saved you a season of trial and error, hit that like button right now. It genuinely tells the algorithm to show this video to the next tired gardener who is standing in front of a dead flower bed, wondering what went wrong. Subscribe if you want the next field report in this series, because I've got a verdict coming on the perennials that survived the exact same 3-year test. And trust me, you do not want to miss which ones made the final cut and which ones I had to dig out and compost. And drop a comment down below with the one specific corner of your yard that you've already given up on. The dry shade, the clay bake, the deer highway, the windy spot, whatever it is, and I'll tell you which of these 10 survivors I'd personally plant there first. Your lush backyard is closer than you think it is. I'll see you in the next video.